Hi, I wanted to give you an update with what is going on in my church. So, for those of you who are just tuning in for the first time, I was kicked out of my church because I refused to stop telling my story about how I was the victim of various types of abuse by someone that had narcissistic traits. Now, you might ask, why was I kicked out of my church? My ex was the president of the church, and he had recruited a lot of flying monkeys from that church. And so eventually they found my blog, which is an anonymous blog. And because I describe what he and others did to me, and they did horrible things to me, I was kicked out of my church. Okay. So now we're about like 6 weeks after I was kicked out of the church. And I wanted to give you guys all an update. So, first of all, I wanted to say I got a very, very kind and considerate message sent to me today. I'm sorry, 2 days ago from a member of our church. I'm not going to say who she is, but she reached out to me and she had read my blog and she had been listening to my podcasts. And what she said was, I think that it is so helpful to know that I am not alone with all that happened in my life. And I'm reading directly from her direct message to me. And she's saying that in response to my blog and my podcast. And I get messages like this all the time. A lot of people reach out to me and say, you're giving me words to describe what I went through. You're helping me to give a framework for what I went through. You are helping me to make sense of my experience, and you're helping me to know that I'm not alone. And that was my whole point in writing my blog, creating my social media page, and now launching out into my podcast, is to let people know they are not alone at all. There are lots of us, unfortunately, that have gone through this sort of abuse, who have been in relationships with people who maybe didn't outright have narcissistic personality disorder, but definitely had narcissistic tendencies and traits. We've gone through smear campaigns. We've dealt with flying monkeys. And so just letting people know they are not alone and giving them terms and words and frameworks to make sense of their experience is why I do what I do. It is so helpful. And how I know it is helpful is because when I was going through it, that is what helped me. It was listening to people and hearing people tell their firsthand experiences and stories that helped me even understand what I was dealing with and then to make sense out of that experience. There's real power in knowing you're not alone. You're not going through this alone. And that to me is why I keep doing what I'm doing and why I will continue to do what I'm doing. And no church is going to shut me down because they want to protect their ex-president or members of their church who are now flying monkeys. They're not going to get me to be quiet. So I did want to give an update, though, on what is going on in my church. I think a few things are key to understand. And there's some things I don't understand, and I don't really care to understand. But I was kicked out of the church. And the reason I was kicked out of the church is a lot of people, not a lot of people, a handful of people left the church whenever I came back to the church because they loved my narcissistic ex. He was their president. And they loved the mother of his children, who was the RE director, which is kind of like a Sunday school director. And those two recruited all of the flying monkeys to harm me. And so they were very loyal to those two. And so some of them left the church. Now, I think they gave the excuse that they were leaving the church because of me, but I don't think that's why they actually left the church. I think they wanted to leave the church for many reasons, all kind of packed on top of each other. In the case of my narcissist, he left the church because he didn't want to be there. He didn't want to be there for years before he actually physically left the church. He was there for one reason and one reason alone. The mother of his children was employed by the church, and he needed to make sure she kept that job, and that job had health insurance, because otherwise he might be on the hook for it. So rather than staying because he wanted to fulfill the mission of the church or be a part of the church or because of some selfless reason, he was always there for very selfish reasons. And I know that because I was married to him and I was in a relationship with him for years. And I know that his primary concern was making sure that she had a job and that job gave her health insurance. And it was during his tenure as president of the church that they increased her salary significantly and gave her health insurance for quarter-time work. Now, I know narcissists now. And once you understand narcissists, they're so easy to predict. So easy to predict. They don't do anything unless there is direct reward for them. Now, rewards can come in a lot of forms. It can come in the form of attention. They love attention. They love being, the most grand, the most powerful, the best. They like to look good. And rewards can also be financial. They can help them financially. And if there isn't some reward in it for them, they don't want anything to do with it. So why was my ex the president of the church? Was it because he believed in the mission of my church and wanted to fulfill it and see it through and make sure that, goodness and righteousness happened? No. He wanted to make sure that the mother of his kids had a job and had health insurance so that they would not have to depend on him for that. He was going through the divorce from her at the time, and he wanted to make sure that his child support payments were low. He didn't know, financial support to his ex, and that he wouldn't have to be on the hook for health insurance. And so as the president of the church, he made sure she had all those things. She has since quit that job at the church. He has no reason to go back to that church. He never wanted to be in that church. When we were married, I had to force him to go to church on Sunday. He didn't want to attend. Now, throughout this whole ordeal, when I was in the church, some people that were loyal to him would be like, he wants to come back. I know he wants to come back. It's just, it's because Ekho's there. He just doesn't feel like it's safe. Now, he was the abuser. He was the one arrested. He was the one assaulted me, but yet somehow I was the dangerous, unstable one. It's all part of the narcissistic smear campaign tactics. And so a lot of people thought that it was because I was in the church that he wouldn't come back, and all of that whole group wouldn't come back. And by that group, I mean like 3 families, basically. Now, again, I know that they didn't want to be there. So what does the church do? They throw me out of the church, the victim, and then their excuse for throwing me out was because I wrote this blog. Doesn't defame anyone, doesn't say anything untrue. It describes through an anonymous blog what was done to me, which was horrific things by both my narcissistic ex and the flying monkeys. So now they've thrown me out of the church, and it's 6 weeks later. What do you think happened? Well, let me tell you what's going through his mind, because I understand narcissists. He has a couple choices. And I wrote this to my friends 6 weeks ago when I got thrown out of my church. I said, I'm not going to talk about this yet on my podcast, but I'm going to write it to you guys so that there's a written record. And I said, he's going to do one of 3 things, depending on how things go. And the third thing is what I really thought he was going to do, but I'll give you the other 2 options first. The first thing that a narcissist might do in this situation is he or she might come back temporarily, not get very involved, but kind of show face and be like, I've come back. Now, they don't want to give money to this cause because, that's selfless, and they can't do that without some reward. And they don't want to just be sort of like a participant in a church. They have to be the president. They have to be on the board. They have to be a leader. They have to be the big shot. So would he want to come back to the church and just be a participant and give his pledge and be an active member of the church? He has no desire to do that. So what I thought potentially, I gave it like a 10% chance that he might come back and sort of come, once or twice a month, show up for church, maybe come to one extra thing here and there. And that was it. And then slowly dwindle off and not come again, because ultimately I know he doesn't want to be there if there's not something in it for him. So I thought that was maybe 10% what might happen. Another 10% of me thought, what might happen is they might, even though there's no reason to, because there are no children that go to our church, they might hire his ex-wife back. So they might hire the mother of his children back to be the RE director. And in which case he would have a strong motivation to go to that church because he wants her to keep that job and he wants her to have health insurance. And maybe the church would be stupid enough again, even though they can't afford it and there are no children, to hire her back. And if they did do something like that, which I didn't think they were going to do that, like I gave this like a 3% chance, then he would suddenly become active again because there's something in it for him. There has to be something in it for him to be an active member again. Well, they didn't do that. Okay. So what I thought was like 80% chance or greater is that he's going to do what he did to me, is he's going to future fake the church. So if I'm right, and during the time that I was in the church, people would be reaching out to him and say, why won't you come back to church? And he would be like, well, I'd like to go, but it just doesn't feel safe with Ekho. I just can't be around her. I can't have the kids around her. Again, he was the abuser, not me. And there's documentation, hospital records of my injuries, police reports to show that. Never any issue with me being, like, no concern that I was in any way, shape, or form abusive or a threat. Until after he went to jail, then he starts spinning this story. I'm crazy. I'm not to be trusted, blah, blah, blah. All the narcissists say during their smear campaigns to, attract their flying monkeys. So what I did think was probably going to happen is he's going to future fake them. So the whole time that I was actually in the church, working hard, doing a lot, bringing people into the church, giving some pretty good sermons, participating in social justice, all of this stuff, I thought that he was kind of saying, and I've heard wind of this, so I think it's true. I would love to come back, and my friends would love to come back, but it just isn't safe with her in the church. Okay, so he set the goalpost here. You get rid of Ekho, we'll all come back and be active members of the church again. They got rid of Ekho. Not one of them have come back to the church. My guess is that they're future faking. So this is how a narcissist future fakes. They keep moving the goalposts. So something like, when this happens, then I'll come back. Okay, well, that happened. Why didn't you come back? Well, it's still not safe because some of her friends go to the church. Okay, whenever that obstacle's gone, why don't you come back? And they keep moving the goalposts. They keep thinking of new reasons or excuses, basically, for why they won't do what they promised they would do. So in this case, he made it clear to at least some people, because I've heard this, that he would come back if I was gone. Well, I'm gone. Why don't you come back? And my guess is he's moved that goalpost, and he will continue to move that goalpost unless there is something in it for him. So when there becomes something worthwhile in it for him to come back to the church, he gets some sort of board position. He becomes the president again and can feed off of that positive attention and that power, that thought of power. Whenever there's some financial gain to him coming back, only then will he come back. Otherwise, he's not coming back, and neither is Flying Monkeys, because none of them wanted to actually be there in the first place. So we will see what happens next. Thank you.